Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavors of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your technical questions answered, and contribute to the community forum. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our construction, tech, or weekly Global Passive House Showcase webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. G'day, welcome back to another episode of the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh, coming to you from a very warm and humid Auckland.
Oh, wow. I am Zack Semke, coming to you from Seattle, Washington, where it is not warm, maybe humid in the form of rain.
Yeah, I put a post up on a discussion group, the Australian Passive House discussion group the other day, because it was 24 degrees Celsius. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit. It's getting up there.
70s.
And 93% relative humidity down in the bottom of my house and that was 8:30 in the morning. It had basically stayed around 22 degrees all night. So we've just got this big kind of tropical mass of hot air over a lot of the country at the moment, and it's pretty muggy. But I posted that because I wanted to get some data from all those people that I know have data loggers in their houses, and sure enough, got some pretty quick feedback from Australia and a couple of houses in New Zealand, passive houses, proudly showing their much lower internal relative humidity, which is something for us to talk more about in the future. But it's really interesting to see passive houses working in a hot summer environment, and also dealing with the humidity, because it's 20, 24, 25, even 30 degrees Celsius I can handle. Most people can handle, but 96% relative humidity, that's something else.
Yeah, no kidding. In Austin, there will be a humid climate conference focused on passive house in humid climates in the beginning of May that I'm going to be traveling to.
Awesome.
I'm really looking forward to it and speaking at. But there's a growing community of practitioners who are figuring out how to crack that nut.
Yeah, very good. All right. Well, let's get into today's show. It's a bit of a local episode for you, Zack. A bit of a Seattle flavor.
Yes. Yeah, definitely, with Sloan Ritchie. And before we do, I think I'll dive into some thank yous for the sponsors that make the accelerators work happen. So a big thank you to our founding sponsors: 475 High Performance Building Supply, Baxt Ingui Architects, Glavel Foam Glass Gravel, Minutair All-in-One HVAC and Dehumidification Units, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, Partel, Rockwell North America, Stocorp, and Zola Windows. Thank you too to our champion sponsors, Icon Windows and Doors, Proseco, and SIGA. And thanks to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority.
Awesome. All right. So tell us about Sloan Ritchie.
Yes, well, Sloan Ritchie is owner of the builder developer Cascade Built. And Sloan is a true pioneer of passive house and the passive house movement in Seattle. His stated mission is to demonstrate the scalability and feasibility of using passive house construction techniques to build cost-competitive, high-performance projects. And he is working to help establish Seattle as a leader in the nation and changing the way people think about where they live and work. And so we touch on a lot of those themes in the interview. He's a graduate of Whitman College in Washington State, and he's also a MBA grad at the University of Washington. He's got a really interesting background. And we dive into how he started doing development work, what brought him to Passive House in the first place, and the really impressive body of work that he has built in this city. So hope you enjoy. So I have Sloan Ritchie here from Seattle-based Cascade Built, and I have been a long admirer of your work, Sloan. And so I just want to give you a hearty welcome to the Passive House podcast.
Thanks a lot, Zach. It's great to be here, and I also appreciate all the work you're doing to promote things and really get the message out. It's great. Glad to be here.
You. Awesome. So I think a lot of listeners are familiar with you and your work, but for those who aren't, could you start by introducing yourself and describing Cascade Build and its body of work?
Sure. So I'm from Seattle and have been here for my whole life, more or less. And so all of our work is based in and around Seattle. And I've been doing this construction development thing for nearly 20 years here. And we got started, I guess if you go way back, I had a different career track initially, and had some architect friends and started to notice the built environment around me, and made the connection between the built environment and energy consumption and climate change. And I just saw such low-hanging fruit there and thought, something could be done here. And I was also interested in architecture and design and the idea of, doing something more hands-on. And so all those factors kind of came together for me. I quit my job, bought a parcel in the central area in Seattle, and did a development project there. It was a Lead for Homes pilot program, sort of before they really had that all dialed in. And it was just full on learning. All I'd done before that is, tile my bathroom. Wow. So it was a really big learning experience for me. But what I realized was even hiring the general contractor there and, kind of working alongside them was how little they understood about sustainability or even gave it a thought really at all. I could see they had their systems and they had production and they had, methods and all that was kind of fascinating, but they didn't have any concept about sustainability. And that was really what drove me to do this in the first place. So I decided to get real hands-on and sort of figure that all out for myself, what it meant and how to implement it on site on that first project. And then from there, I did another project. And by the time I was into the second or third project, I parted ways with the general contractor and sort of took over, just knowing that I was there every day and I could manage the process. And so that's kind of how we got started. And that was before I knew anything about Passive House, which I sort of first learned about maybe in 2009 after the economy tanked, and Katrin from FIAS came and did a presentation here in Seattle, which I attended, along with a lot of other people in the field who didn't have much.
The Green Lake Library presentation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
The Passive House Seattle lore. Yeah.
Yeah. It was well attended because it was 2009 and nobody was building anything anymore because everybody was going broke and banks were going away. So
exactly.
Let's go, re-educate ourselves. And she gave this presentation, which was fascinating to me because I had just completed a couple LEED and LEED Platinum projects, and I just knew they were leaving so much on the table in terms of the thing that seemed to matter most to me, which was carbon footprint and energy. And it just seemed like there could be so much more. And the way it was explained at that meeting resonated with me. And I realized, okay, if I do this and I don't do the LEED certification, then I'm really getting more of what I want out of the buildings. So it still took another couple of years before we were able to even get a project going, because I think, the economy was still in the toilet, and there really nobody was coming to me saying, here's some land, do a Passive House So I eventually did that myself, found some land and built a single family passive house, and just kind of school of hard knocks, figured it out on a single family project.
I've been to that house. It's a great house. And it's, I think, the first certified passive house in Seattle, right?
Yes, it is the first certified. And there was one that was done before that I had learned a lot from Dan Whitmore, really amazing, and even earlier version of a passive house in Seattle. And so there were few examples, but that was one that I could actually see and touch and feel and learn from. And I think that was critical, being able to actually know that it's possible, kind of helped. And then, of course, this was all, 10 years ago now. And since then, we scaled that up, and I was doing townhouse projects. So I thought, well, let's do a townhouse project. We'll do that passive house. And that was wildly complicated because there weren't enough resources with knowledge and experience, myself included, having only done one single house before, and there just wasn't anything already in the ground. So we were just, kind of falling on our face and learning a lot rapidly and making lots of mistakes. And we did that project and then continued to scale it up. And at the time, our company had started building apartment buildings. And so I thought, I wonder if we can scale it up to that. And that really fascinating thing about the apartment buildings for me was how well passive house scaled up. I think if I went back to single family houses, it would reintroduce some more complications that just go away in an apartment building. And, because the unit configuration and the volume to siding ratio and all that makes it much easier. And so that was a really gratifying realization. I mean, I realized that in concept, and then when we actually executed it, it came true. And so that we finished our first passive house apartment building we started in 2015 with entitlements and completed it in 2018, and have since done several other apartment buildings in Seattle, including one that we just broke ground on last month, which is 107 units in the central area in Seattle. So
that's fantastic. I've watched your career and your company grow, and you've become a really kind of pivotal player in the passive house scene in Seattle. And it came after a time. So initially in the kind of 10 years ago time frame, the Pacific Northwest was a little bit of a leader in North American passive house. There were a lot of single family projects. Dan Whitmore, your project, Joe Pietro's Mini B project, the Artisans Group, Green Hammer, Hammer in Hand. I know I'm missing some key players, but there's a lot going on. And then it felt like we got completely eclipsed by Vancouver, BC, and all the exciting stuff has been going on there. And then on the multifamily front, there was Pennsylvania with the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency, credit for passive house basically, and New York and Massachusetts. And so I've been frustrated. But meanwhile, you've been like hammering away, and suddenly there are a bunch of major multifamily passive house projects in the city that you've created, which has been super exciting to watch. And I just, thank you for keeping at it and for your leadership in making that happen. I think hopefully it's transforming the way that the market sees passive house, and also that policymakers see passive house in Seattle. It'd be great to see some passive house friendly policy passed here.
Yeah,
so
I hope you have something in mind specifically. That would be great. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we'll have to, let's work on that.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I'm really curious to hear about is the cost premium for passive house, and what you've seen, given that you've done a number of projects now, a number of projects in a similar typology within the multifamily space. Do you see that cost premium going down for passive house? And if so, why do you think that's happening?
Well, certainly in the trajectory that we just talked about, the cost premium has come way down. And a big chunk of that is learning curve. We kind of got through the learning curve. And one of the nice things I found about the passive house community is people are willing to share. So some of the learning curve I've gotten by calling other people and saying, hey, how did you deal with this issue? what product, what solution, what strategy, what vendor. And part of the learning curve, I've just tripped and fallen on my face a few times and had to redo things.
Right.
You try to do the former, not the latter, but I'm an experiential learner. So I've always had to learn sort of the hard way.
The hard way. Yeah. Right.
And as far as the cost premium, I guess for now, I'll just focus on what I'm more currently familiar with and building, which is multifamily product. And I would say the cost premium is somewhere in the 0 to 5% range, which isn't very precise, but it's also kind of hard to get a beat on what that actually is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, you could make an argument for really either of those numbers. And I think if you do the project really well from an integrated design approach, you really have an integrated design process from the very beginning, then I think you can move closer toward the 0 range. If you don't do that, or if you, there are other things that can happen that push you more up into the 5% range, where you're just like adding on extra cost, but not finding any commensurate savings. And I think when people talk about the cost premium, I think that they're missing out is that there's cost and there's also benefits, right? So maybe it costs 5% more, but you net 10% more cash flow. So maybe on whole, it's way better. So I think that's part of the conversation that people always miss. People always say, well, what's the cost premium to do that? Nobody asks, what's the cost premium to do stainless appliances? That's just what everybody does. But if you went and got white ones, they'd be cheaper. And, right. Nobody talks about, what the payback is for granite and stainless. Mm-hmm. And I think that, that it's like, I think about a project that we did, 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, and how much that project cost. And let's say it was a 5% cost premium. Well, today that project would cost another $1 million or $2 million to do.
Real just because so insane here. Yeah.
Just because, costs keep rising, it's what happens everywhere. And, you kind of wish, oh man, if I could build that way back then, it'd be great. I'd be so competitive now because I'd have this futuristic building built at a lower cost in the past. It's
right.
Like that argument right there, for me is compelling enough to just add the 0 to 5%, whatever it might be, to your project and just get it built. I do think it helps to have the knowledge and experience from having done passive house projects to help drive that cost premium down, toward the 0. And you bringing in people who are experienced mechanical engineers and structural engineers and designers, architects, and builders. I mean, we have our own. In our case, we're a developer and a general contractor, kind of in one. And so, at the first design meeting, there sits the project manager and the superintendent to talk about what the potential issues are. So we're already kind of, value engineering, if you will. We're already, saving money when pencil hasn't hit paper yet. And so those types of things really, I think, help drive the cost premium down very low. I wish I had a more precise answer to your question. It's 1.6%, but there isn't really a satisfying answer.
Yeah, I think that your answer is right on. It's in some ways it doesn't. I mean, it matters, but it doesn't. It's the directionality that matters. We're trending towards 0 because we're learning, of course the benefits are so key. So you mentioned cash flow, and that's partly that is from renters, right? In your case?
Yes, from tenants, yes. Mm-hmm. And it could be because you're saving them utilities costs, and so you can charge them a little bit more rent. Right. We also have a program in Seattle that some other utilities have adopted where the utility will pay you for the difference between what you would have consumed and what you actually do consume. So there are programs like that. I think also on the cost side, there's some finer points about cost. Like, it might be in a passive house building that it makes more sense to build a building that has less modulation. And so you may go that direction in your design, which may actually save some cost. And it might be harder to get that passed through a design review process.
Right.
Yet, as long as
particularly in Seattle, yes,
particularly in Seattle, and we're not the only market.
Yeah.
But it might be that because you're achieving these sustainability goals, the jurisdiction might be more forgiving about certain aspects of the building design that they otherwise might beat you up about. And so I think that those are some more subtle ways in which the cost premium can go down. Like, we kind of did a flat facade, so it's easier to frame. There's a little bit less structural lumber, and this and that. And so those are some of the more subtle ways that I think you can wring out some of the cost savings. And it's also kind of the same in terms of subtleties on the savings side, on the revenue side, and how each project goes about that varies. Like, for example, there's another project in Seattle which charges a green fee. It's a project that's a net zero, and they did a really nice job, and they're very upfront. And we're going to charge you $25 or $50 a month. I forget the amount, and that's enough for them to cover whatever investment they had to make up front.
So to find tenants who will do that, how do you, or do that sort of thing, how do you market your projects to tenants?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I mean, I think it's complicated, and tenants tend to look for the place they want to live when their last lease is up and in the neighborhood they want to be, and they're not necessarily looking for that exact thing. They're not saying, I want a net zero place.
Yeah.
So I think it's more just a matter of getting out in front of enough people with the right message that it will resonate with people. That might be something that's not primary in their goals, but they see what you've got to offer and they say, that sounds pretty good. I care about that. Particularly in Seattle, where I think people do have an interest in sustainability and climate change and so forth. But we found that there's quite a range. People will come and, they see the sandwich boards and they walk in and you tell them what's going on. And there's a whole range of responses from, oh my God, that is amazing. I can't believe this is a passive house. I used to live in Europe. This is so cool. Where do I sign? All the way down to, I don't even know what you're talking about, but this is right by my work. And you guys have bicycle parking and I'll take it,
Right.
And then we try to work with that range of people. And so that, at the other end would try to get people educated about what it is so that there's a little more stickiness to their tenancy. Like, hey, you've got this, we've got this filtered fresh air. So, when it gets to be like wildfire season and there's smoke in the air here on the West Coast, just know that keep your windows closed and we've got filtration in place that will filter out those fine particulate matter. And that's going to be healthy for you. So we try to educate people so that they can come to appreciate it. Even if when they walked into the building, all they wanted was an apartment that cost $1,500 a month or whatever the case may be.
That makes sense. So how about electrification and embodied carbon in your work? I think, as I think about my awareness of the different elements of decarbonization in buildings, it's definitely evolved over time. I was introduced to this all through operational carbon and passive house, and then have more recently become more kind of attuned to how important or the role that embodied carbon also plays and electrification can play. How has that evolved in your practice?
Well, first of all, electrification, I'll start with that.
Yeah.
We used to almost always use natural gas for our projects, at least for domestic hot water, and sometimes for other uses as well. And it was only on our most recent project, which started design a couple of years ago, that's in construction now, where we switched to an all electric for an apartment building. So, and that's because we hadn't really seen any solutions that we thought were viable or reasonable or that would even work, that were all electric. But now there's been many all electric hot water systems that we've seen that are affordable and work well for our purposes. So we've got this 107 unit project. We're doing some sand and CO2 electric hot water heaters that go into, huge sort of battery sized tanks that people can draw off during the day. and it's a really simple system. So once we were able to see that this system works, a few other people had tried it, worked out the kinks, there's a good design concept in place, then we felt like it was time to do that. So, and now in the city of Seattle, they've banned natural gas for buildings over 3 stories. So everyone's going to be stuck doing it now, which is great news.
Yeah.
But the solutions are mature enough that it's reasonably easy to do so from commercially available equipment and subcontractors and so forth. So that's been our sort of path to electrification. Like, knew it was a good idea a long time ago, but didn't really find the right kind of solutions. And now we're sort of copy and paste that Sandin system or something similar. As for the carbon question, that one's a lot trickier and harder to answer and get to the bottom of. I mean, I think the big piece there is concrete. We use there's a lot of Portland cement, which is very high, carbon footprint. So that's the big thing. And we've looked at doing CLT and mass timber projects, and we did one single family one, so we've sort of dabbled in it, but haven't gotten that into the bigger projects yet. Know that that's a good way to deal with embodied carbon, but haven't been able to actually execute that on a project for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, you talked about simplicity in form. I mean, that's been the initial conversation around embodied carbon and Passive House was, hey guys, you're using all the insulation. Yeah, that's you're on the wrong track, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, if you use high embodied carbon insulation products, then especially like XPS, then you could be really not doing a lot of good on the carbon accounting.
Yeah.
But more recently, there's been, I think, a little bit more kind of, as we've grappled with this question, a more understanding of the kind of the ways that Passive House design and low embodied carbon buildings can actually be naturally aligned. And one way, of course, is simple form. It makes it, simple form makes it easier to achieve the energy targets. And as you alluded to, is also means simpler framing, less material, and all of that can be good for the embodied carbon piece. So yeah, it's an interesting journey I think we're all on. And I don't know if you noticed or saw this, but it looks like there's some big dollars coming from the Department of Energy for funding research in low embodied carbon material development as part of the bipartisan package that already has been passed. So not the one that we're hoping it gets passed with Build Back Better, but the one that's already passed. So hopefully we'll have some good options. So how about it's great to talk with somebody who understands the world of Passive House development. And I think there are probably some aspiring Passive House developers who are in the audience, or maybe dream of, maybe ready to do their next project or dreaming about it. So what advice do you have for potential Passive House developers? Like because I think we all want to see more Passive House developers out there because we all want to see everything scale up as quickly as possible. So how can that happen?
Yeah, we really need everything to scale up as quickly as possible here. I think one thing, I guess one of the reasons behind what I'm doing is sort of just to prove that it can be done.
Yeah.
And I think that I'm not sure, but I think I've proved that it can be done because we're doing it. So I guess that that's sort of happened now, which is good. And I think that right there should help anyone who's considering it. Just knowing that there's lots of people doing this, not just me, but lots of people all over the US are executing projects like this. And I think if you're someone who's like thinking about it and maybe you're like, well, I'm not really a developer or I'm not really an expert yet or any of that kind of stuff. I mean, man, the entire time I've been doing this, I've been not really an expert and sort of learning as I go and scaling up to something else that I've never done before. And I think that you just have to, I guess for me, the question was, am I going to do this or am I going to not do this? And at some level, you just have to say, I have to do this. It's something that I'm not going to build a schlocky building.
Yeah.
So I'm going to build the best possible building that I know how to build. And I know that this is important. And this is what I'm going to do. And I'm just going to figure it out. And it's just like a put your shoulder to the boulder kind of situation. And even when I did my first apartment development project, I had never done an apartment development project before. So I was really kind of just starting from scratch. And particularly when you're doing something that's community minded or, like doing a passive house project, people can see that you care and you're trying to do the right thing. I think people are pretty willing to help you, whether that's people in the passive house community when it comes to all the, hurdles you're going to have to deal with about making the passive house part of it work, all the way to the financing side of things. And, how are you going to get your project financed? And I think one of the things that kept me going on the early projects when it was really difficult, it was really difficult to finance, or it was too difficult to make it passive house, or, how are we going to overcome this next challenge, was just saying, well, we committed to certify. So let's just see this thing through. I committed. I said I'm going to certify. It's like, is it really important at this point? I'm not sure, but I'm really struggling, but we committed to it. So let's just see it all the way through. And every time we did that on a project, we just learned and learned and learned so much. And now it's like, it's not difficult because now we know all the, not all, but most of the pitfalls and, most of the solutions. And we sort of know, oh, this is an area where we're going to call somebody or resource this. There's tons of resources out there. On the technical side. I mean, your organization is like doing all kinds of stuff to bring resources together. And you can just literally call anybody in that community and they're just willing to say, yeah, or call this person and that person. And, she did this and this project. And, oh, that reminds me of this other solution. And, prices have come down for, windows and things that used to be really difficult to get 10 years ago. I just think, now is the time. It's urgent that we do this. And even a project you start today is going to take a couple of years. So you just start now and commit and go get it done. You will not regret it when you're done. Although there's times in the middle where you might regret it.
Well said.
Well, so also, I think the other thing, if I were giving advice to that person, is when you're picking the team, I mentioned the integrated design process. I think the team is everything. And each member of that team, the mechanical engineer, the general contractor, the superintendent, the project manager, the architect, the structural engineer, the CPHC, everybody on the team needs to really be somebody that's done that kind of project before, if at all possible, and maybe several of them. When I first did an apartment project, I hired a mechanical engineer out of Virginia, even though I'm based in Seattle, a couple thousand miles away, because that firm had done it and seemed to understand it and, sort of been through the ringer a little bit. Don't regret doing that at all because it worked out great because they sort of knew where to go with things. And we all learned together. And I think that having that team really carefully considered is super important, especially if you're just doing like your first project, because nobody knows exactly what it's going to come out like. And if it's your first project, you're going to have a lot of learning and a lot of moments where you're wrong and you got to kind of scratch that idea and come up with a new one. So really having the right team in place is hugely important. Got to put your A team on the project.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this has been really wonderful to catch up with you, Sloan, and to get these insights from you. Is there something you want to leave us with before we close up? What's any final thoughts?
Let's see. Well, it's been great to talk to you and to talk to your audience about this, Zach. I guess I would say, as you're getting started on your project, because I know now I've thoroughly convinced you, reach out to the community, reach out to me, reach out to others in the community if you have any questions about development, passive house development, and really lean on people who have done it before. You might feel like, oh, I'm a little shy to call so-and-so. They're really well known. Don't worry about it. Give them a call. I did that the whole time I was learning, and people are happy to take your call and encourage your doing passive house projects. So I would say reach out, lean on the community. The community is incredible here. And best of luck.
And that was Sloan Ritchie of Cascade Built in Seattle. Great interview, Zack. Really enjoyed that. It's always great to hear from a developer who's at the pointy end of financing projects of all types, but particularly passive house projects.
Yeah, isn't he incredible? There's some really, really inspiring stuff.
Another company that sort of, we talked a lot about companies that have come out of the 2008 financial crisis. It was really the genesis of a lot of really good stuff.
I know, it's so bizarre.
Not to belittle the pain and the obviously it was a very traumatic experience for a lot of people, but it's an amazing what has come out of those hard times.
Well, imagine the kinds of stories we're going to be looking back at in 10 years from now as we, hopefully we talk about the days when we were in the COVID lockdown and how we got out of those, but they changed the way that we're,
hopefully
all these different stories. Yeah. So what were some of the takeaways for you?
The big flavor of Sloan's story is jumping in and getting into it. And he sounds like it is really easy. But he also admits that there was a steep learning curve. But I really like that attitude of, I wish this would happen and no one else is doing it, so I'll do it. He, right from the start, deciding to leave his job and buy a piece of land and then build a lead home, and then one thing led to another, and has just carried on that same pattern of, wouldn't it be great if there was a passive house in Seattle? Well, no one else is doing it, so Sloan stepped up and did it and built the first one, and then moved on to townhouses, and now is developing apartment buildings. So that just that constant jumping in there and not being afraid of what you don't know. And I think he said towards the end there that you just got to appreciate that you're not going to be the expert when you start. You just got to get in and give it a go.
Indeed. And I alluded to this in the conversation, but I got to watch this firsthand, and partly actually when I was at NK Architects, NK collaborated with Sloan, was the Joe Giampietro, I think, was the lead architect for Sloan's own house that he mentioned, the passive house, and then there was a team of architects at NK that was working on the Pax Futura building, which is the first apartment building that Sloan did, and so. One of the firsthand experiences I had from that was being in a firm that was really hungry to do passive house work, and being so grateful that Sloan was making that happen in our community. And he then continued to do that, and it's been consistently kind of stepping up to bigger and more significant projects, and so that willingness to just jump in and make it happen that Sloan has had had a lot of impact on this city. And if he hadn't had that mindset, there'd be a real void here in terms of passive house practice. So you can make a big difference, I guess, with a little courage.
In bigger buildings too, it was really interesting, his point about the fact that passive house scales up so well, and it hit him to the fact that he'd struggle, he thought, to go back. I'm sure he wouldn't, but there's so many efficiencies to be gained when you put dwellings on top of each other, and the form factor, and just the services, that doing passive house in an apartment typology or even townhouses is not that hard when compared with standalone passive houses, which is interesting because a lot of markets start out with single standalone houses and then develop into bigger and bigger. But when you get into the technical details, you realize that it does scale really well, and you also have a lot more people involved with projects of that size, and which led to the conversation about cost premium. And I've always been a fan of the integrated design approach. And we talk about it a lot, but I also know that it can be quite hard to do to get everyone around the table. And obviously that's an advantage of being a developer and the project manager yourself, is that you have access to a lot of those people. But that story about having the project manager sitting around the table with the superintendent at the beginning. Now, superintendents, it's a bit of an American term. We would probably call that the property manager, or someone who's going to be looking after the building. Is that a good description?
Well, it depends. I mean, there's a site superintendent that is part of that's part of the construction process. So they're leading the team, the builder team.
Right.
So I think that may have been the context where a superintendent came up.
Right.
I don't totally recall. Yeah.
But the more people you can have involved in that early discussion, the better, because it just prevents little things coming up later that you might not have thought about. So yeah, that can be a big contributing factor to bringing down that cost premium to potentially zero, and not costing you any more to produce a building of much higher quality.
Especially if that group of people that you're bringing together are able to take their learnings from one project to the next and apply them, and so that the learning curve that he talked about can happen. And so I think I've said it probably enough times. Just that's so powerful, and it's fun to see. It's fun to see a great example, and when you see teams that are doing many buildings, we had on the project showcase or construction deck. Anyway, one of our events recently, we had a team from Ontario that's I think done 12 multifamily passive houses now. They're just able to dial things in such a great way that it becomes easy for them and cheap and doable.
Yeah, and that's always the thing with pilot projects, and it's very tempting to try and run the numbers on those first projects, but there's always going to be inefficiencies the first time round. And I just encourage people, if they are getting into the space, to not be too concerned with prices the first time round, because you can learn a lot and bring those costs down the more you do, potentially down to a 0% premium. He also alluded to the sharing of knowledge in the passive house community, which we've talked about a lot. Is definitely a big theme, and that also means that if you are starting a project for the first time, you don't have to start. I mean, these guys were pioneers at the time, so that culture of just getting stuck in and trying things out and having that learning curve was a necessary part of that process. But it's not as necessary now, because we have such a big body of information and experience across the whole world, and that's a big part of what the Passive House Accelerator is all about. So you can get a jump start now by connecting with people who will be very willing to share really valuable insights.
Yeah, it's true. I think another thing about the scaling up that I thought was really great to hear is that the domestic hot water systems are becoming, like all electric domestic hot water systems for apartment buildings, are becoming doable and are reasonable, affordable, simple. And so that's another thing that has changed over the last 5 years, actually. So not only does it make sense to scale up passive house to apartment buildings, but you can also make them all electric now, which has obviously pretty big implications for the carbon footprint of these buildings.
So what's driving that more technology change or policy change in your part of the world?
Oh, a very good question. I think it's a ratcheting effect, I think, between technology and policy. So because you can't pass a policy if it is, or you probably shouldn't pass a policy if something is entirely impossible to.
You won't get reelected if you try.
Right. It'll be a short-lived policy. Yeah. we got to a place where we were pretty close, and it was starting to happen in buildings, and the city of Seattle passed that ban on new gas for larger buildings, with some exceptions, but that was thanks to the fact that there was technology in place. But now there's this demand, and all sorts of money and expertise and energy going into all electric systems.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that we'll probably see that bring down cost more, and maybe that the ban of new gas can expand to more buildings as that happens.
Awesome. All right. Great stuff. Anything else from Sloan? We're going to have to get Sloan back on some part of the accelerator. There's so much stuff that he could talk about.
No, I just, way to go on his vision to do this work so that he can prove that it can be done, because that's what he's doing.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. What do we got coming up around the place?
Yeah, lots of stuff. So next week, actually, this coming edition of Passive House Accelerator Live. Also, I'll take a moment to say that the Construction Tech and the Project Showcase that used to be on 2 different days of the week have now been brought in under one umbrella. They happen on Wednesdays in North America, so that's Thursdays in New Zealand and Australia. And that one umbrella is called Passive House Accelerator Live. So on the 1st and 3rd week of the month, we will present a Project Showcase, and on the 2nd and 4th, we'll present a Construction Tech edition of the show. So this one that's coming up on Wednesday, February 16th, or the 17th for you, is going to feature Sean Taylor of Team Green Architects. And she's going to be presenting about the 3-wood Passive House. Sean was a guest on the Passive House podcast some months ago with Matthew. Great interview. So we'll include that in show notes. So please join us for the presentation of a really cool house in the middle of amazing country in New Zealand. And then the next day, we will have a Passive House component spotlight for the first time from Proseco. So Proseco will be talking about air barriers for Passive House retrofits and new construction. They have a whole family of fluid applied membranes for various parts of the construction process. And so they'll be diving into the geeky details of that. You don't want to miss that. It's on Thursday, February 17th at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. So that's Friday, your time. And then the next week, the Construction Tech edition of Passive House Accelerator Live will feature our very own Sean St. Amour, who is now with Clay Construction. He's a co-host of Construction Tech, and he's going to be presenting on kind of the theme of the month for us at the Accelerator, which is airtightness. And his presentation will be how to not put a pin in it, eliminating pinholes for airtightness. So there's also lots of programming happening from Passive House institutions in North America and around the world that we will link to in show notes.
I've got to mention the Icebox Challenge.
Oh, yes, in Sydney, right?
Yeah, coming up. And I just clicked through to the Australian Passive House Association Facebook page and noticed that we were talking at the top of the show about humidity, and there's a great event coming up in Sydney on the 1st of March, and the topic is humidity in passive houses. So check that out. Very, very topical. As I'm sweating in my little recording office here. It's fascinating stuff. And it's really great to see that being talked about. Awesome. All right. Good to chat. I think that's about us for this week.
Yeah. Thanks, Matthew. That was fun.
All right. We'll catch you again next week on the Passive House podcast.